The stage rattled into Ruby City, Idaho, on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, carrying a woman who had just experienced the most humiliating moment of her 22 years of life. And Miranda Zimmerman pressed her face against the dusty window to hide the tears streaming down her cheeks from the other passengers, who pretended not to notice her distress. She had traveled all the way from Boston 3 weeks prior, answering an advertisement placed by a respectable rancher named Theodore Whitmore, who sought a bride with education and refinement to grace his prosperous cattle operation outside Boise. The letters they exchanged had been cordial, even warm, and Miranda had allowed herself to believe that perhaps this arranged marriage could become something genuine over time. Her parents had passed within months of each other the previous winter, leaving her alone in a city where unmarried women of limited means had few respectable options. Teaching positions were scarce, and the thought of living on the charity of distant cousins who barely tolerated her presence had driven her to answer Mr. Whitmore's advertisement. The meeting in Boise had been a disaster from the moment she stepped off the stage. Theodore Whitmore had taken one look at her travel-worn appearance, her serviceable brown dress that had seen better days, and her auburn hair escaping its pins after weeks of difficult travel, and his face had fallen into an expression of barely concealed disappointment. He had been civil enough during their brief conversation in the hotel parlor, but his eyes kept drifting toward the door as if seeking escape. That evening, he had sent a note to her room explaining that he had made a terrible mistake and could not proceed with the marriage. He enclosed $50 for her trouble and suggested she might find opportunities in one of the smaller mining towns to the north. The humiliation had burned through her like wildfire. She had sold nearly everything she owned to make the journey west, had said goodbye to the only life she had ever known, and had steeled herself to marry a stranger with grace and dignity. Instead, she had been rejected like a flawed piece of merchandise and sent away with what amounted to a severance payment. The hotel proprietor had been kind enough to arrange her passage to Ruby City, mentioning that the town was experiencing growth due to recent silver strikes and that a woman of education might find work there. Miranda had accepted because she had no other options, and because the thought of remaining in Boise where people might recognize her as the mail-order bride who had been returned filled her with unbearable shame. Now, as the stage creaked to a halt in front of a weather-beaten building with a sign reading Ruby City Stage Office and General Store, Miranda gathered what remained of her courage and prepared to face whatever came next. She was the only passenger disembarking here, and she climbed down with as much dignity as she could muster, while the driver handed down her 2 battered carpetbags and a small trunk containing everything she had left in the world. Ruby City sprawled before her in the golden afternoon light, a collection of false-fronted buildings lining a wide main street that ran between scattered houses and mining claims climbing the surrounding hills. The town had a raw, unfinished quality that spoke of recent establishment and rapid growth. Men in dusty work clothes moved along the wooden sidewalks, and the sound of hammering echoed from somewhere beyond the main street. It was nothing like Boston, nothing like anything Miranda had ever known, and the sheer foreignness of it made her feel unmoored and lost. "Need help with your luggage, miss?" The stage driver was looking at her with concern, probably wondering why a respectable young woman was arriving alone with no one to meet her. "Thank you, but I can manage," Miranda said, though she had no idea where she was going or what she would do. The $50 in her reticule would not last long, and she needed to find lodging and employment as quickly as possible. "Mrs. Patterson runs a decent boarding house just down the street," the driver offered, gesturing toward a two-story structure with a painted sign. "She's particular about her guests, but she is fair." Miranda thanked him and began gathering her belongings when a voice spoke from behind her. "Those bags look heavier than you do, madam. How about I carry them wherever you are headed?" She turned to find herself looking up at a tall man in his mid-20s wearing dusty range clothes and a hat pushed back on his head to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of creek water in summer. His face was tanned and weathered in the way of men who spent their lives outdoors, but his expression held genuine kindness rather than the calculating assessment she had endured from Theodore Whitmore. Something about his direct, honest gaze made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I can manage, thank you," she said, though her voice wavered slightly. "I do not doubt you can," he replied easily, "but that does not mean you should have to. My name is Dalton Eastwood, and my mother raised me to help ladies with heavy lifting. If you refuse, I will have to write her a letter confessing my failure, and she will be deeply disappointed in me." Despite everything, Miranda felt a small smile tug at her lips. "We cannot have that on your conscience." "Exactly what I was thinking." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing and tucked one carpetbag under his other arm. "Where are we headed? The boarding house, I suppose. Mrs. Patterson's establishment. Good choice. Mrs. Patterson is formidable but fair." He started walking, adjusting his pace so she could keep up comfortably. "Are you new to Ruby City?" "I just arrived on the stage." "I figured as much, seeing as I have never seen you before, and I would definitely remember if I had." He said it matter-of-factly rather than flirtatiously, as if simply stating an obvious truth. "What brings you to our little corner of Idaho?" Miranda hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I am seeking employment." "What kind of work?" "I was a teacher in Boston." "I am qualified to instruct children in reading, writing, arithmetic, geography, and literature." Dalton's face lit up. "A teacher? That is exactly what Ruby City needs." "We have been trying to get a proper school established for months now, but we have not been able to attract anyone with real qualifications. Most educated women do not want to come this far into the mountains." "I am beginning to understand why," Miranda said, then immediately regretted the bitter edge in her voice. Dalton glanced at her but did not pry. "Ruby City is rough around the edges, but it is a good town full of decent people trying to build something lasting. The miners are not all drunkards and gamblers, despite what you might have heard. Many of them have families or are hoping to start families, and they want their children to have proper schooling." They reached the boarding house, and Dalton carried her luggage up the front steps to the porch. Before he could knock, the door opened to reveal a stout woman in her 50s with shrewd gray eyes and an apron dusted with flour. "Dalton Eastwood, what have you dragged to my doorstep?" Mrs. Patterson asked, though her tone held more amusement than disapproval. "A lady in need of quality lodging, Mrs. Patterson. May I present Miss—" He paused, realizing he had never asked her name. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Miranda said quickly, using her mother's married title without quite meaning to. The designation had slipped out as a form of protection, though she regretted the deception immediately. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "A widow." Miranda hesitated for only a moment before nodding. It was not entirely a lie. She had been prepared to become Mrs. Whitmore, and in a sense, that version of herself had died in that Boise hotel parlor. "My husband passed recently. I have come west seeking a fresh start." "Well, you have come to the right place for that," Mrs. Patterson said briskly. "Come inside and we will discuss terms. Dalton, you can leave those bags in the front hall." "Yes, madam." Dalton set down the luggage and touched the brim of his hat to Miranda. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I hope you will be very happy in Ruby City, If you need anything, my family's ranch is about 5 miles south of town. Anyone can give you directions. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Eastwood. Miranda met his eyes and felt something warm unfold in her chest at the genuine welcome she saw there. It has been a difficult journey, and your help means more than you know. My pleasure, madam. He smiled at her, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his weathered face into something approaching handsome, then nodded to Mrs. Patterson and left. Miranda followed the boarding house proprietor inside, where the interior proved clean and well-maintained despite the rustic surroundings. Mrs. Patterson showed her the parlor, dining room, and kitchen before leading her upstairs to view available rooms. I have 2 rooms open, Mrs. Patterson explained. One faces the street and gets morning sun, the other looks out on the back garden and is quieter. Both are $5 a week, including breakfast and supper. Lunch is an additional $1 per week if you want it provided, or you can make your own arrangements. Miranda did quick calculations in her head. At $5 per week, her money would last only 10 weeks, and that did not account for other necessities. She needed to find employment immediately. "The room facing the garden, please," she said, "and I will take my meals with the other boarders, Mrs. Patterson named a reasonable price, and Miranda counted out the first week's payment from her carefully hoarded funds. The older woman's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a hint of sympathy that suggested she recognized desperation when she saw it. "Dalton mentioned you are a teacher," Mrs. Patterson said as she showed Miranda to her room. "Is that true?" "Yes, I taught for 3 years at a girls' academy in Boston." "Then you should speak with Mayor Harrison and the town council. They have been trying to establish a school for the better part of a year. The problem is not money. It is finding someone qualified and willing to take on the position. Most teachers who venture this far west are men, and the council specifically wants a woman to teach the younger children." Hope flickered in Miranda's chest. "Do you think they might consider me?" "I think they would be fools not to. Mayor Harrison keeps an office above the general store. You should call on him tomorrow morning." Miranda thanked her profusely, and Mrs. Patterson left her to settle in. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small desk, and a window overlooking a tidy vegetable garden. It was more than she had dared hope for, and Miranda sank onto the bed feeling the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catch up with her. She allowed herself 5 minutes to rest, then rose and unpacked her belongings with methodical efficiency. Her teaching certificates and references from the Boston Academy went into the desk drawer where she could access them easily. Her few dresses were hung in the small wardrobe, and she laid out her best outfit for tomorrow's meeting with the mayor. It was a dark green wool that was far too warm for July in Idaho, but looked more professional than her other options. That evening, she joined the other boarders for supper in Mrs. Patterson's dining room. There were 5 others staying at the house: 2 minors, a clerk from the assay office, a young couple who were saving money to build their own home, and a widow named Mrs. Fletcher who worked as a seamstress. They greeted Miranda with varying degrees of curiosity and welcome, and she found herself relaxing slightly in their unpretentious company. "Mrs. Patterson says you are a teacher," the young wife Alice said eagerly. "Oh, that would be wonderful for Ruby City. My sister has 3 children, and she is so worried about their education. I hope to speak with the mayor tomorrow about the possibility of establishing a school," Miranda replied. "Mayor Harrison will hire you on the spot," one of the miners predicted. "His wife has been after him for months about getting a proper schoolhouse built." The conversation drifted to other topics, and Miranda listened more than she spoke, gathering information about the town and its residents. Ruby City had been founded 4 years earlier following silver strikes in the nearby mountains. The population fluctuated with mining fortunes, but currently stood at around 800 souls. The town had a mercantile, 2 saloons, a church, a doctor, a blacksmith, and various other businesses that served the mining operations and the ranches in the surrounding valleys. After supper, Miranda excused herself and returned to her room. She sat at the small desk and wrote a brief letter to her cousin in Boston, letting her know that she had arrived safely in Idaho and was pursuing a teaching position. She did not mention Theodore Whitmore or the humiliation in Boise. Some failures were too painful to commit to paper. The next morning, Miranda rose early and dressed in her green wool dress despite the heat. She pinned her auburn hair into a severe bun and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was pale after weeks of stress and travel, and her brown eyes held shadows that had not been there before her parents died. But she lifted her chin and squared her shoulders, determined to present herself as a capable professional rather than a desperate widow. After breakfast, she walked to the general store and climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor where Mayor Harrison kept his office. She knocked firmly on the door marked Town Office and waited. "Come in," called a male voice. Miranda entered to find a middle-aged man with thinning hair and spectacles sitting behind a desk, covered in papers and ledgers. He looked up with the harried expression of someone perpetually behind on paperwork. "Mayor Harrison, my name is Miranda Zimmerman. I arrived in Ruby City yesterday, and I understand the town is seeking to establish a school." The mayor's expression transformed from harried to intensely interested in the space of a heartbeat. "You are a teacher?" "Yes, sir. I taught for 3 years at the Pemberton Academy for Young Ladies in Boston. I have certificates and references." She placed her documents on his desk. Mayor Harrison snatched them up and read with flattering intensity. "These are excellent credentials, Mrs. Zimmerman. Excellent. The town council has allocated funds for a school, and we have a building that can be converted for the purpose. But we have struggled to find a qualified teacher willing to relocate to Ruby City." "When could you begin?" Miranda blinked, surprised by his eagerness. "I would need time to assess the building and prepare curriculum, but I could potentially begin instruction in 3 weeks if that is acceptable." "Acceptable? It is marvelous. The position pays $60 per month, paid quarterly. The school building needs some work, but the town will provide materials and labor. You will have full authority over curriculum and discipline, though the council does ask that you provide quarterly reports on student progress." $60 per month was more than Miranda had earned in Boston, and the relief that swept through her was so intense she felt momentarily dizzy. "That is very generous, Mayor Harrison. I accept your offer." "Excellent, excellent." The mayor pumped her hand enthusiastically. "Can you come by this afternoon? I will gather some council members, and we will show you the building. It is the old assay office on Pine Street. The assay operations moved to a larger building last month, and the town purchased the old structure for community use." Miranda agreed and left the office feeling as if an enormous weight had lifted from her shoulders. She had employment and a purpose, and with $60 per month, she could afford her room at the boarding house and begin rebuilding her life. The humiliation in Boise began to feel like something she might eventually move past, rather than a wound that would define her forever. She spent the rest of the morning exploring Ruby City, familiarizing herself with the town where she would apparently be living for the foreseeable future. The main street bustled with activity as miners, ranchers, and townspeople went about their business. She found the church, a simple white structure with a small cemetery behind it, and the doctor's office, which was reassuring to know existed. The general store was well stocked with goods shipped from Boise, and the proprietor greeted her warmly when she introduced herself as the new schoolteacher. That afternoon, she met Mayor Harrison and 3 council members at the former assay office on Pine Street. The building was a simple rectangular structure with good bones, but in need of significant cleaning and modification. Miranda walked through the space, mentally arranging desks and planning where to place a chalkboard and bookshelves. "We can have it cleaned and whitewashed by the end of the week," one council member promised. "What else do you need?" Miranda pulled out the small notebook she had brought and began making a list. "Desks and benches for the students, a desk for myself, a chalkboard, chalk and slates for the younger children, primers and readers, arithmetic texts, maps, and a globe if possible. I will also need paper, pens, ink, and various other supplies." The council members made notes and promised to order what could not be found locally. Their enthusiasm was both flattering and slightly overwhelming, and Miranda found herself warming to these rough frontier men who cared enough about their children's education to invest significant resources in establishing a proper school. As the meeting concluded and she prepared to leave, she nearly collided with someone entering the building. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up to find Dalton Eastwood smiling down at her. "Mrs. Zimmerman, I heard you were hired as our new school teacher. Congratulations." "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood. News travels quickly in Ruby City." "Small town," he agreed. "I stopped by to volunteer my labor for the school renovation. I am reasonably handy with a hammer and saw." "That is very kind of you. Self-interest, really." "My sister has 2 children who desperately need proper schooling, and I want to make sure you have everything you need so you do not decide to leave." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Miranda felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I have no intention of leaving, Mr. Eastwood. I am committed to this position." "I am glad to hear it." He held her gaze for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Miranda found herself unable to look away. There was something about this man that drew her, something open and honest that was entirely different from Theodore Whitmore's calculating assessment or the superficial courtesy of the Boston gentleman she had known. Over the following weeks, Miranda threw herself into preparing for the school's opening. She worked alongside Dalton and other volunteers to clean and renovate the building, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw and helping to paint walls a cheerful yellow that would brighten the space. Dalton proved to be not just reasonably handy but genuinely skilled with carpentry, and he built sturdy desks and benches that would serve multiple generations of students. They fell into an easy companionship as they worked, talking about everything and nothing. Miranda learned that Dalton was the youngest of 4 siblings and had inherited his love of ranching from his father, who had established the family spread 15 years earlier. He had never married because, as he explained with characteristic honesty, he had never met a woman who made him want to give up his independence. "Until recently," he added one afternoon as they worked side by side painting window frames. The comment hung in the air between them, laden with meaning that made Miranda's heart race. She did not know how to respond. Part of her wanted to tell him the truth about why she had come to Ruby City, about the humiliation of being rejected by a man who found her unsuitable before even giving her a chance. But another part feared that honesty would destroy the fragile connection growing between them. So she said nothing and focused on her painting with unnecessary intensity. Dalton did not press, but she felt his gaze on her and knew he sensed there were things she was not saying. The school opened in mid-August with 19 students ranging from 5 to 14 years old. Miranda stood before them on that first morning feeling both nervous and exhilarated, aware that she was shaping the future of this frontier town in ways large and small. She divided the students into 3 groups based on age and ability, then began the careful work of assessing their current knowledge and planning appropriate instruction. The children were a mixed lot, some well-behaved and eager to learn, others rowdy and resistant to authority. But Miranda had experience managing difficult students, and she established clear expectations and consistent discipline from the beginning. Within a week, even the most resistant students had settled into the routine, and the schoolhouse rang with recitations and the scratch of slate pencils. Dalton's niece and nephew were among her students. Emma was 7, bright-eyed and curious, while Robert was 9 and more interested in horses than books. Their mother, Dalton's sister Catherine, came to the school one afternoon to introduce herself and thank Miranda for taking on the position. "My brother speaks very highly of you," Catherine said with a knowing smile. "In fact, he speaks of little else lately." Miranda felt her cheeks heat. "Mr. Eastwood was very helpful during the school renovation. Dalton is a good man, but he is also stubborn and independent to a fault. If he has taken an interest in you, it means something significant." Miranda did not know what to say to that, so she changed the subject to Robert's progress in arithmetic. But Catherine's words lingered in her mind, stirring hope and fear in equal measure. The truth was that Miranda had developed feelings for Dalton that went far beyond gratitude for his help or appreciation for his kindness. She found herself looking forward to his visits to the school, which became increasingly frequent. He would stop by to check on repairs or deliver supplies, always finding an excuse to linger and talk with her after the students had gone home. Their conversations ranged from serious discussions of literature and philosophy to playful debates about the merits of various riding horses. With Dalton, Miranda felt more herself than she had in years, as if his steady presence allowed her to shed the protective layers she had built up after her parents' deaths and the disaster in Boise. But the lie about being a widow stood between them like a barrier she did not know how to cross. The longer she maintained the deception, the more difficult it became to imagine confessing the truth. What if Dalton was repulsed by the knowledge that she had been a mail-order bride rejected by a man who found her inadequate? What if he saw her differently, not as a capable professional, but as a desperate woman who had sold herself to a stranger? September arrived with cooler temperatures, and the first hints of autumn color in the aspens scattered through the pine forests. Miranda had been in Ruby City for 2 months, and her life had taken on a comfortable rhythm. She loved teaching, and the satisfaction of watching her students' progress filled a void she had not fully acknowledged existed. The townspeople had welcomed her warmly, and she had established genuine friendships with several women including Catherine and Mrs. Patterson. And then there was Dalton, who had become as essential to her daily happiness as breathing. One Saturday afternoon, he appeared at the boarding house and asked if she would like to see his family's ranch. Mrs. Patterson, who had long since realized that Miranda was not actually a widow but had kindly kept that knowledge to herself, gave her an encouraging nod. Miranda accepted, and they rode out of town in Dalton's wagon under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The Eastwood Ranch sprawled across a fertile valley with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. The house was a sprawling log structure with a wide porch and flower boxes that spoke of a woman's touch. Cattle grazed in distant pastures and horses moved in a corral near the barn. "It is beautiful," Miranda said, meaning it. "My father chose this land because of the water and grass," Dalton explained. "He knew cattle could thrive here, He died 5 years ago, and my older brother runs the operation now, but we all pitch in. It is a family enterprise." He showed her around with obvious pride, introducing her to his brother Thomas and Thomas's wife, and to the ranch hands who worked the spread. Everyone greeted her with warm courtesy, and Miranda felt enveloped in the easy affection of a large, close family. It made her acutely aware of how alone she was in the world. They ate supper with the family, a boisterous affair with multiple conversations happening simultaneously and children running between the kitchen and dining room. Afterward, Dalton walked with Miranda to a spot by the creek where willows trailed their branches in the water, and the setting sun painted the mountains gold and purple. "I need to tell you something," Miranda said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She could not continue this deception, not with this man who had shown her nothing but honesty and kindness. "I have not been truthful with you." Dalton turned to face her, his expression serious. "Go on." "I am not a widow. I have never been married." The confession felt both liberating and terrifying. "I came west as a mail-order bride. A rancher in Boise named Theodore Whitmore advertised for a wife, and I answered his advertisement after my parents died, and I found myself alone with limited prospects. But when I arrived, he took one look at me and decided I was not suitable. He sent me away with money for my trouble and suggested I try my luck in the mining towns. That is how I ended up in Ruby City." She could not look at Dalton as she spoke, afraid of what she might see in his face. "I let everyone believe I was a widow because I was ashamed. Being rejected like that, like a piece of merchandise that did not meet specifications, it was the most humiliating experience of my life. And then you were so kind, and I did not know how to tell you the truth without risking whatever was growing between us." The silence stretched so long that Miranda finally forced herself to look up. What she saw in Dalton's face was not disgust or disappointment but blazing anger. "That fool," Dalton said, his voice tight with fury. "That absolute fool. He had the chance to marry you, to have your intelligence and kindness and strength in his life, and he threw it away because of what? Vanity, superficial standards. His loss is my fortune, Miranda. His loss is absolutely my fortune." Miranda felt tears sting her eyes. "You are not angry that I deceived you. I am angry that you felt you had to. I am angry that some shallow fool hurt you so badly that you felt ashamed of circumstances that were not your fault." He took her hands in his grip warm and solid. "Miranda, I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing beside that stage looking lost and scared but determined to face whatever came next. Every conversation we have had since then has only made me more certain that you are the woman I have been waiting for my entire life." "Dalton," Miranda whispered, his name a prayer and a question. "I know we have not known each other long, and I do not want to rush you or pressure you given what you have been through, but I need you to know my intentions. I am courting you, Miranda Zimmerman. I want to marry you, not because I need a housekeeper or because I am looking for someone to fill a role, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love your passion for teaching and the way you care about your students. I love your strength and intelligence and the kindness you show to everyone around you. I love you." The tears spilled over then, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," Miranda said. "I did not think I could feel this way so quickly, but I do. You make me happy in ways I did not know were possible." Dalton pulled her close, and Miranda rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. They stood that way for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the creek burbled past and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "So what happens now?" Miranda asked eventually. "Now I court you properly," Dalton said. "I take you to church socials and community dances. I have Sunday dinner with you at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house under her watchful eye. I wait a respectable amount of time so that the town gossips cannot say we rushed into anything. And then, when you are ready, I ask you to marry me properly, and we build a life together." "That sounds wonderful," Miranda said, "though I should mention that I have no intention of giving up teaching, at least not immediately. I would never ask you to. You are brilliant at what you do, and those children need you." He pulled back slightly to look down at her. "We will figure out how to balance everything. The ranch is close enough that you could live there and still reach town easily for school, or we could maintain a house in town during the school year if you prefer. We will make it work because that is what people do when they love each other." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Dalton drove Miranda back to Ruby City under a sky brilliant with stars. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon and kissed her hand with old-fashioned courtesy that made her smile. "May I call on you tomorrow after church?" he asked. "I would like that very much." The next few months passed in a blur of happiness that sometimes made Miranda feel as if she were living in a dream. Dalton courted her with a combination of traditional formality and frontier practicality that perfectly suited both their personalities. He took her on picnics in the mountains and taught her to ride a gentle mare named Clover. She helped him with ranch bookkeeping and discovered she had an aptitude for managing accounts. They attended barn dances and church services together, and the entire town watched their courtship with benevolent interest. Catherine became a good friend, confiding that she had never seen her brother so happy. He was starting to accept that he would remain a bachelor, she said one afternoon when Miranda visited the ranch. He dated a few women over the years, but none of them could accept ranch life or wanted to change him into something he was not. You two fit together in a way that just makes sense. Winter arrived early that year, with the first snow falling in late October. Miranda's students became restless as the days shortened, and the cold made them reluctant to focus on lessons. She adapted by incorporating more physical activity into the school day and allowing them to act out historical events or mathematical problems rather than simply reciting from books. In early December, Dalton took her on a sleigh ride into the mountains. They traveled to a high meadow where the snow lay pristine and untouched, and the silence was broken only by the jingle of harness bells and the whisper of wind through pine trees. He stopped the sleigh and turned to her, his face serious in the winter sunlight. "Miranda, I know I said I would wait, but I cannot hold this in any longer. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. Will you marry me?" Miranda's heart soared. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a delicate gold band with a small sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. "My mother wanted you to have this. She says it will bring you as much happiness as it brought her during her marriage to my father." Miranda let him slide the ring onto her finger, marveling at how perfectly it fit. "When?" she asked. "Whenever you want. Tomorrow, next month, next year, I will wait as long as you need." "Spring," Miranda decided. "After the school year ends in May. That will give us time to plan properly, and for you to prepare a place for us at the ranch." "May it is," Dalton agreed, then kissed her thoroughly enough to make her forget the cold. They announced their engagement at Christmas, and the entire town celebrated as if the news belonged to everyone. Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting an engagement party at the boarding house, and Catherine immediately began planning the wedding with an enthusiasm that was both endearing and slightly overwhelming. Miranda wrote to her cousin in Boston sharing the news, and received a warm letter in return wishing her happiness and expressing relief that she had found her place in the world. The winter passed quickly despite the cold and occasional storms that closed the school for days at a time. Miranda and Dalton spent those snow days at the ranch, where she learned the rhythms of ranch life and discovered that she loved the work almost as much as teaching. She helped with calving season in March, staying up through cold nights to assist with difficult births and warm newborn calves that struggled in the frigid temperatures. Dalton watched her with undisguised admiration as she worked beside him without complaint, and his brothers joked that he had found himself a true rancher's wife. April brought warmer weather and the first wildflowers pushing through the melting snow. The school year would end in 6 weeks, and preparations for the wedding intensified. Miranda had saved most of her salary, and Catherine helped her order fabric for a wedding dress from Boise. They spent evenings at the ranch with Catherine's sewing machine, creating a gown of cream silk with simple lines that suited Miranda's practical nature while still being undeniably elegant. Dalton and his brothers built an addition onto the ranch house, creating private quarters for the newlyweds that included a sitting room where Miranda could work on lesson plans, and a bedroom with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. The care they put into the construction made Miranda feel cherished in ways that went beyond words. The wedding took place on a brilliant Saturday in late May, with the entire town in attendance. They held the ceremony in the church, with the minister officiating and Miranda's students serving as ushers and attendants. She walked down the aisle on the arm of Mayor Harrison, who had graciously agreed to stand in for her late father, and felt her heart swell at the sight of Dalton waiting at the altar in a new suit with his hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with love. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but Miranda felt the weight of every word. This was not an arrangement of convenience or a business transaction. This was a true partnership built on love and respect and shared dreams. When Dalton kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers that made them both laugh. The reception took place at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed an army. People danced to music provided by a fiddle player and a man with a guitar, and children ran wild in the lengthening spring twilight. Miranda danced with Dalton until her feet hurt, then danced some more because she could not bear to stop. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Dalton pulled her aside. "Happy, Mrs. Eastwood." "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Miranda replied honestly. "When I arrived in Ruby City last summer, I felt like my life was over. I had been rejected and humiliated, and I could not see how things would ever be right again. But you changed everything, Dalton. You saw me when Theodore Whitmore only saw what I lacked. You loved me for exactly who I am." "His loss was absolutely my fortune," Dalton said, repeating the words he had spoken that evening by the creek. "I thank God every day that he was too blind to see what I saw immediately." They spent their wedding night in their new rooms, and Miranda felt truly home for the first time since her parents died. She woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and Dalton's arm around her waist, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Summer arrived in full force, and Miranda discovered the rhythms of being both a rancher's wife and a teacher. The school was not in session, but she spent her days helping with the ranch work and preparing curriculum for the next school year. She also discovered that she was pregnant, a revelation that filled her and Dalton with excitement and a touch of anxiety. They had hoped to wait a bit longer, but Catherine assured them that ranching and babies went together naturally, and that she would help with whatever Miranda needed. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Miranda continued teaching through the first trimester. though she had to excuse herself occasionally for bouts of morning sickness that struck at inconvenient times. Her students were fascinated by the idea of their teacher having a baby, and the older girls peppered her with questions about pregnancy and childbirth that she answered as honestly as age-appropriate explanations allowed. In November, she reluctantly gave up her teaching position as her pregnancy advanced and moving around the classroom became more difficult. The town council found a replacement teacher, a young man fresh from a teacher's college in the East who was eager for adventure. Miranda spent time training him and helping him understand the unique challenges and rewards of frontier education. Their son was born on a snowy January night in 1880, after a labor that was difficult but mercifully shorter than Catherine had warned her to expect. Dalton held their son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Miranda felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. They named him Daniel, after Dalton's father, and he proved to be a healthy baby with a loud cry and his father's green eyes. Miranda fell completely in love with him, marveling at his tiny fingers and the way he fit perfectly in the crook of her arm. Dalton was a devoted father from the start, getting up for nighttime feedings and learning to change diapers with the same focus he brought to breaking horses or mending fence. Spring came again, bringing renewal and growth. Daniel thrived, growing chubby and cheerful under the combined attention of his parents, his extended family, and half the town who stopped by regularly to check on Ruby City's first baby born to their school teacher. Miranda had thought she might be desperate to return to teaching, but she found herself content to focus on motherhood for the time being. There would be time for teaching again when Daniel was older. For now, she wanted to savor these fleeting months of his babyhood. The next few years passed in a blur of happiness, punctuated by the normal challenges of ranch life and parenthood. Daniel grew into a sturdy toddler who loved horses and following his father around the ranch. Miranda discovered she was pregnant again when Daniel was 2, and this time she carried the news with more confidence and less anxiety. Their daughter was born in the summer of 1882, a tiny creature with auburn hair like her mother and a surprisingly calm temperament. They named her Margaret, after Miranda's mother, and Dalton was utterly enchanted. He had been wonderful with Daniel, but there was something about having a daughter that reduced him to absolute mush. Margaret had her father completely wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. When Margaret was 6 months old, Miranda approached the town council about returning to teaching on a part-time basis. She proposed splitting the school day with the current teacher, with her taking the younger students in the morning and him continuing with the older students in the afternoon. The council agreed enthusiastically, and Miranda found a rhythm that allowed her to pursue her passion for education while still having plenty of time for her children. Life settled into a comfortable pattern over the next several years. The ranch prospered under the combined management of Dalton and his brother Thomas, with Miranda's bookkeeping skills contributing significantly to their financial success. Ruby City continued to grow, evolving from a rough mining camp into an established town with amenities and culture. The school expanded to 2 full-time teachers, plus Miranda's part-time role, and they eventually built a larger schoolhouse to accommodate the growing number of students. Daniel started school when he turned 6, sitting in his mother's classroom with pride and occasional embarrassment when she called on him. Margaret followed 2 years later, proving to be even more academically inclined than her brother. They were both bright, healthy children who thrived in the combination of ranch life and formal education. In 1887, when Miranda was 31 and had been married for 7 years, she found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was a surprise, as she and Dalton had assumed their family was complete. But they welcomed the news with the same joy that had greeted their first two children. Their second son was born in early 1888, and they named him Matthew. He arrived early and small, causing some initial worry, but he proved to be a fighter and thrived under his family's devoted care. Time continued its inexorable march forward. Daniel grew into a responsible young man who loved ranching and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Margaret developed a passion for literature and teaching that reminded Miranda powerfully of her own younger self. Matthew was still young but showed signs of being the most adventurous of the three, always exploring and getting into harmless mischief. In the summer of 1890, Miranda and Dalton celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch that rivaled their original wedding reception. Half the town attended, and their children helped serve cake and lemonade with varying degrees of competence and enthusiasm. As the evening wound down and they stood together watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Dalton pulled Miranda close. "You ever think about that day you arrived in Ruby City?" he asked, standing by the stage looking lost and scared. "Sometimes," Miranda admitted. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different person." "In some ways it did. You were broken then, hurt by that fool in Boise, but you put yourself back together and built something amazing here. I am so proud of you, Miranda. Proud of the teacher you are, the mother you are, the partner you have been to me in building this life." "We built it together," Miranda corrected gently. "Everything good in my life exists because you saw something in me that day, because you were kind to a stranger who needed help." "You saved me, Dalton." "No," he said firmly. "You saved yourself. I just had the good fortune to be there when you did it, and the even better fortune that you decided to love me back." Miranda smiled and leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him and the absolute security of their love. Theodore Whitmore's rejection, which had once felt like the end of her world, had ultimately been the catalyst that brought her to this moment. She had found her home, her purpose, and her great love in this rough mountain town, and she would not change a single moment of the journey that brought her here. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, their children ran over to join them. Daniel at 11 was already tall and serious. Margaret at 9 was bright and curious, and 5-year-old Matthew launched himself at his father's legs with typical enthusiasm. Dalton scooped him up while keeping one arm around Miranda, and she pulled their older children close. This was her family, her life, her future. Not the safe, predictable existence she had envisioned when she left Boston, but something infinitely better. Something real and hard-won and precious beyond measure. Years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of ranch life and family. Daniel took on more responsibility at the ranch as he grew, proving to have his father's instinct for managing cattle and land. Margaret devoured every book she could get her hands on and eventually expressed interest in attending teachers' college, an ambition both Miranda and Dalton supported enthusiastically. Matthew remained the family's wild child, always finding adventure in unexpected places and keeping everyone on their toes. In 1895, when Miranda was 39, Margaret left for college in Boise. The separation was painful for the entire family, but they visited regularly, and Margaret came home for summers and holidays. She thrived in her studies, and eventually returned to Ruby City with her teaching certificate, joining her mother at the school that had expanded to 3 full-time teachers and a separate building for the upper grades. Daniel married at 21, choosing a rancher's daughter from a neighboring valley who fit into the Eastwood family as if she had always belonged there. They built a house on ranch land and began their own family, giving Miranda and Dalton their first grandchildren. The arrival of Daniel's son, named Dalton in honor of his grandfather, filled Miranda with a joy she had not anticipated. She held the baby and marveled that she was now grandmother to a child who would grow up with advantages and opportunities that frontier children of her generation could only dream about. Matthew eventually found his calling in law, surprising everyone by expressing interest in becoming a lawyer. He left for college when he was 18, and though he loved Ruby City, he eventually settled in Boise where legal opportunities were more abundant. But he visited often, bringing his eventual wife and children to the ranch for extended summers that reminded him of his roots. Margaret married a fellow teacher, and they made their home in Ruby City where they could be close to family while pursuing their shared passion for education. Her wedding was a joyous affair that brought the family together and reminded Miranda of her own wedding day all those years ago. Time transformed Ruby City from a rough mining town into an established community with amenities that would have been unimaginable when Miranda first arrived. Electric lights came to the main street in 1898, and there was talk of eventually running lines to the outlying ranches. The town got its first library, something Miranda had advocated for tirelessly, and she served on the board that managed its collections and programs. Through it all, her relationship with Dalton remained the bedrock of her existence. They grew older together, their faces gaining lines and their hair turning silver, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time and shared experience. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, cattle disease and the occasional ranch accident. They had celebrated births and mourned deaths, including the loss of Dalton's mother and brother Thomas. Through every joy and sorrow, they had faced it together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. On a warm spring evening in 1900, they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set behind the mountains. They were 50 and 44 respectively, with grandchildren playing in the yard and their adult children visiting for Sunday dinner. The sounds of family laughter drifted from the house, and the ranch spread around them in peaceful prosperity. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Miranda asked. "When you carried my bags to the boarding house?" Dalton smiled. "I said my mother would be disappointed if I did not help a lady with heavy lifting. And you said you would never forget seeing me if you had." Miranda reached for his hand. "I think about that sometimes, about how different my life would have been if you had not been standing there when that stage arrived, if you had not seen me." "I would have found you eventually," Dalton said with conviction. "Maybe not that day, but soon after. Ruby City is not that big, and I was not about to let the most interesting woman I had ever seen slip away." "You called Theodore Whitmore a fool." "He was. He remains a fool to this day, though I suppose I should be grateful to him. His loss truly was my fortune, Miranda. The greatest fortune of my life." Miranda squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses earned through decades of hard work and the strength that had never wavered. "I used to be so ashamed of what happened in Boise. But now I see it as the necessary path that brought me to you, to this life, to everything that matters. I would not change it, Dalton. Not a single moment. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They made me strong enough to deserve you." Dalton pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You always deserved me, sweetheart. You just did not know it yet." They sat together as darkness fell and stars emerged, wrapped in the comfortable silence of two people who had spent more than 2 decades learning each other's rhythms and moods. The sound of their grandchildren's laughter floated on the evening air, and the ranch settled into the peaceful quiet of nightfall. Miranda thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off that stage 22 years ago, humiliated and heartbroken, and convinced her life was over. She wished she could tell that younger version of herself that everything would be all right, that rejection and pain would ultimately lead to joy beyond imagining, that the best was yet to come, waiting just around the corner in the form of a kind cowboy with green eyes and a smile that could light up the world. But perhaps that younger Miranda had needed to walk through the fire to become the woman sitting on this porch, surrounded by family and love and a life well lived. Perhaps every painful step had been necessary to bring her to this perfect moment. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked, reading her mood in the way he always could. "About being grateful," Miranda said simply. "For all of it. The pain and the joy, the failures and the triumphs. Every step of the journey that brought me here to you, to this life we have built together." "Then we are thinking the same thing," Dalton said, and kissed her again as their grandchildren's laughter rang out in the gathering darkness, and the ranch spread around them in peaceful prosperity, a testament to love and hard work, and the courage to build something lasting in the wild frontier of Idaho. The years that followed continued to bring change and growth. Ruby City evolved into a thriving small city with amenities that would have seemed impossible when Miranda first arrived. The school system expanded to include a proper high school, something Miranda had advocated for tirelessly during her years on the school board. She eventually retired from active teaching in 1905 at age 49, but she continued to serve as an education consultant and mentor to younger teachers who sought her advice. Dalton remained active in ranch management well into his 60s, though he gradually turned over more responsibility to Daniel and Daniel's growing sons. The Eastwood Ranch prospered through changing times, adapting to new technologies and methods while maintaining the core values that had guided it from the beginning. Electricity finally reached the ranch in 1910, and while Dalton grumbled good-naturedly about newfangled conveniences, Miranda loved the freedom from oil lamps and the ability to read without straining her eyes in dim light. Their grandchildren grew and began having children of their own, making Miranda and Dalton great-grandparents and filling the ranch with another generation of laughter and chaos. Family gatherings became large, boisterous affairs, requiring extensive planning and coordination. Miranda loved every minute of it, thriving in the role of family matriarch and delighting in watching her descendants grow and flourish. In 1915, Ruby City celebrated its 40th anniversary with a week-long festival. Miranda and Dalton were honored as two of the town's most influential pioneers, and they sat on the reviewing stand for the parade feeling both proud and slightly embarrassed by all the attention. A reporter from a Boise newspaper interviewed them about their early years in Ruby City, and Miranda found herself recounting the story of her arrival with honesty she would not have been capable of decades earlier. "I came here broken and ashamed," she told the reporter. "I had been rejected as a mail-order bride and thought my life was essentially over. But this town and the people in it gave me a second chance. More importantly, my husband saw something in me that I did not see in myself. He gave me the courage to rebuild and the love to flourish. Ruby City made me who I am today." The article ran in newspapers throughout Idaho, and Miranda received letters from other women who had faced similar circumstances and found hope in her story. She answered each one personally, offering encouragement and reminding them that setbacks were not endings but opportunities for new beginnings. As they moved into their 60s and then 70s, Miranda and Dalton slowed down but never stopped. They traveled occasionally, visiting Matthew in Boise, and taking a memorable trip to San Francisco that opened their eyes to how dramatically the world was changing. But they always returned to the ranch with relief, grateful for the peace and beauty of the mountains and valleys they had called home for so many decades. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1920, their family threw them a celebration that drew people from throughout the region. Former students, now middle-aged themselves, came to honor the teacher who had shaped their early education. Ranching families who had worked alongside the Eastwoods for decades came to celebrate the partnership that had been a model for so many. The party lasted an entire weekend, with people camping on ranch land and sharing stories around bonfires that burned late into the night. Miranda stood before the assembled crowd and tried to express what she was feeling. 40 years ago, I stood in a church in Ruby City and married the best man I have ever known. I thought then that I understood what marriage meant, what partnership meant, but I was wrong. I could not have imagined the depth of love that would grow between us, the strength we would find in each other, the joy we would create together. Dalton, you have been my rock, my partner, my great love for 4 decades. You took a broken woman and loved her back to wholeness. You gave me a family when I had none, a purpose when I felt lost, and a home that has nurtured not just me but generations of children and grandchildren. I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. There was not a dry eye in the crowd, and Dalton pulled her into his arms as applause and cheers erupted. You saved yourself, remember, he murmured in her ear. I just had the good fortune to be there when you did, and the sense to never let you go. They danced under the stars that night, moving slowly to music played by their grandson, who had inherited his great-great-grandfather's musical talent. Miranda rested her head on Dalton's shoulder and felt the absolute contentment of a life well lived. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, and her great love in the mountains of Idaho. The young woman who had arrived in Ruby City thinking her life was over had been transformed into someone strong and capable and deeply loved. She had raised children who were thriving, contributed to her community in meaningful ways, and built a partnership that had sustained her through every challenge life had thrown at them. As she and Dalton made their way back to the house late that night, surrounded by family and friends, Miranda sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She was grateful for the journey that had brought her here, for the rejection that had seemed like the end but was actually the beginning, for the town that had welcomed her, and most of all for the cowboy with green eyes who had seen her standing beside a stage 22 years ago and decided that helping her with her luggage was absolutely essential. That decision, that small act of kindness, had changed everything. It had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams and a love that would endure until her last breath and beyond. Theodore Whitmore's loss had indeed been Dalton Eastwood's fortune, but it had been Miranda's fortune too. She had found herself in the wild frontier of Idaho, had discovered strength she did not know she possessed, and had built something beautiful and lasting that would continue long after she was gone. As they climbed the porch steps of the home they had shared for 40 years, Dalton paused and pulled her close one more time. "Happy, Mrs. Eastwood." "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, Mr. Eastwood," Miranda replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They walked inside together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever years remained with the same partnership and love that had sustained them through 4 decades. The ranch settled into nighttime quiet around them, and the mountains stood guard in the darkness, eternal witnesses to the love story that had unfolded in their shadow. It was a story of redemption and second chances, of courage and resilience, of a mail-order bride who had been rejected and a cowboy who had the wisdom to see that one man's foolish loss was indeed his fortune. And it was a story with a perfect ending, the kind that only comes from facing hardship with grace and choosing love, even when love seems impossible. The kind of ending where everyone lives happily ever after, because they worked for that happiness every single day and never took a moment of it for granted.